them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. May God grant us wisdom and understanding of these words.
When England's King Charles was crowned earlier this year, Brits faced the question, what does it mean to live under a king? Public debate arose about the coronation ceremony. Many opposed the high cost of the ceremony as the country faced an economic crisis, and many citizens live in poverty. Others called the coronation an opportunity to showcase both traditional British heritage and the modernization of British values. The coronation took place at Westminster Abbey, but was attended by leaders from many different religions. Queen Camilla chose to reuse a previous crown rather than commission a new one for sustainability's sake. The invitation invoked the ancient British folk tale of the Green Man bringing the renewal of spring. All of these details combined to tell the story of Britain's monarchy, both in the past and today, communicating to Brits and to the world what it will mean to live under the reign of King Charles. The coronation painted a picture of a religiously inclusive, environmentally sustainable kingdom that remains connected to its historical roots. It also broadcast the country's financial commitment to traditional monarchy, perhaps at the expense of social welfare. Now, as Christians, we often use the term God's kingdom to describe what it means to live as a person of faith. Like the pageantry of the coronation, Jesus told many stories to help people understand what it means to live under the reign of God. King Charles's coronation reinforced ties to old systems of power, even while it hinted at new approaches. By contrast, Jesus's stories subvert power structures by doing things in completely unexpected ways, and sometimes maybe exaggerating a little bit. Many of Jesus's stories emphasize community and relationships. So perhaps talking about God's kingdom, the ways we are kin together, is a better image. Today's gospel contains 3 of these stories, Jesus's parables about the kingdom. Each shows us a slightly different image, and together they paint a fuller picture. We're going to look at them in the opposite order from how they are recorded in this gospel. The last first and the first last, to borrow another one of Jesus's phrases. In the third parable, we meet a merchant who is hunting for fine pearls. Now, the Greek word that's translated merchant here most closely means wholesaler. So we can guess that this merchant is not just looking for really good pearls, but a lot of pearls in bulk to resell. What he finds is something an order of magnitude beyond what he had expected. It's so much better that it throws his entire identity into question. Instead of discovering a collection of pearls that could be bought at bulk discount and resold, the merchant finds one fine pearl. He goes and he sells everything to buy this one pearl. And that word really does mean everything. He no longer has a wholesaling business or a life savings or any of the trappings of wealth. All he possesses is one amazing pearl. Now, we might imagine that being a businessman, he intends to sell that amazing pearl and turn an even more amazing profit with which to buy back everything he has just sold and more, making the pearl a wise investment. And some people who talk about this parable take that angle. But the story doesn't tell us that. The story ends with a man who used to be a merchant but no longer owns a business and his really cool pearl. The man formerly known as a merchant has given up his job, his place in the hustle of commodification, and instead has given his life to this treasure that he found. In 1985, Henry Nouwen was a celebrated professor at Harvard Divinity School. His 20-year career had already encompassed participation in the civil rights movement and teaching appointments at the University of Notre Dame and Yale Divinity School before he ended up at Harvard. He had published 19 books, including 2 which would become classics in the field of pastoral theology. By all external measures, he was incredibly successful. And yet, for Henry Nouwen, something was missing. He felt lost. Several years earlier, Nouwen had met Jean Vanier, the founder of the L'Arche communities. L'Arche is an international federation of communities whose mission is to make known the gifts of people with intellectual disabilities, revealed through mutually transforming relationships. Vanier sensed Nouwen's lostness and invited him to come stay for a while at the original L'Arche community in France. Nouwen took a 9-month leave of absence from his teaching post to accept the invitation. While at L'Arche, Nouwen found something he had not encountered in his academic career. He found a different pace of life, an emphasis on relationship rather than renown. This community transformed his spirit and gave him a sense of purpose. Like the merchant in our story, Nouwen knew that this treasure was worth giving up everything for. The next fall, he resigned his position as a professor, and he moved permanently to L'Arche Daybreak in Toronto, Canada, where he spent the rest of his life. Nouwen would later write about how in L'Arche, the everyday takes on a quality of sacredness. You can encounter God doing the dishes, doing the laundry, just hanging out together. So too, in Jesus' other 2 parables, everyday images can point us to the kingdom of God. In the middle story of our 3, we meet a woman baking bread. This is a common image for everyday life in ancient Israel and also today. But this woman is spreading yeast through 3 measures of flour. We're not talking about 3 cups here, a household amount. This is something like 60 pounds of flour. This yeast is not just providing for the woman and her family. If she made all that bread and kept it for herself, there's no way she could eat it all before it went bad. Instead, the yeast and the woman and the kingdom are providing for the whole community. That first parable, too, gives us an image of community care. A mustard plant may not be a common image for most of us today, but it was well known in Jesus' time and place. Mustard grows wild in the Middle East, and it's invasive enough that it can be called a weed if you don't want it around. It was also cultivated for its culinary and medicinal benefits. Healers of Jesus' day used mustard as a curative for a wide variety of ailments. In this parable, unlike the parable of the pearl, the kingdom of God may initially appear insignificant. It's just a tiny seed. It's not a rare jewel or anything particularly interesting. But in this story, the kingdom grows into something of great abundance. The plant provides shelter for birds and medicine for the whole community. This plant is not selfish, nor are those who benefit from it. Jesus says that the birds come and perch in its branches. Now, I'll note that in other Gospels, it's not perch in its branches because it's a tree, but under its shade because it's a bush, which might be a little more accurate to the botany, but never mind. Either way, this is not just 1 or 2 birds. There are many birds who come to roost in the shelter of the bush or the tree or whatever kind of plant. And there are no territorial squabbles. The plant is shelter enough for all. There is another point that joins these 3 stories together. Seeds and bread require some tending, but they also need to be left alone. A plant will not grow if the gardener continuously uproots it to check on its progress. Bread that is over-kneaded becomes stiff and inedible. Seeds take time to grow, and bread takes time to rise. It needs to rest. We cannot muscle our way into the kingdom of God through overwork. In fact, if we remember back to the man who was a merchant, he needed to give up his labor. Because in the end, we don't earn our place in the kingdom of God. Unlike earthly kingdoms, immigration is not restricted in God's kingdom. We do not have to prove that we are the right kind of person to get in. The kingdom comes when we stop trying to earn it and we start sharing in it. The theme for this summer is Journey to the Quiet Center. So perhaps like seeds, like bread that rests as it rises, as we journey into our quiet center, we too are participating in the kingdom of God. Like the birds of the air, we find our collective home in the shelter of God's love. Like the woman baking bread, we receive abundance in the kingdom, too much for us to keep to ourselves. But there's a twist, as there always is with Jesus' stories. Because although we cannot earn our way into the kingdom, It's not meant for us to just roost there at night and fly away to do our business by day. Like the merchant who gives up his status and identity, we too will be completely changed by the beauty we find in the kingdom of God. So friends, as you journey to your quiet center, how will you rest and be transformed by kinship with God's creation this week? So may it be.